First of all, let me just say good morning to everyone here this morning. Thank you for being here. I was just not here just several hours ago. Arrived last night at 9 o'clock. So this is my home away from home, is the Union Station. Let me just acknowledge folks who are with me this morning. Jim Matthews, who is the CEO and president of Rail Passengers Association, and Sandeep Isola, who is New Haven's Director of Transportation. And of course, I want to say a thank you to members and supporters of the Association of Commuter Rail Employees. I am eager to take questions, but let me just speak briefly about why we are here today. Namely, it is the critical issue of rail safety. For over a century now, people across this country rely on our railroad system for the movement of goods back and forth, be they supplies for manufacturing, for automobiles, coming to our dealerships, consumer goods, clothing and furniture, food products, corn, and what grocery stores and ultimately our kitchen tables need. The list goes on, and here in Connecticut, we are intimately familiar with the Northeast Corridor. It is not only the busiest passenger rail route in the country, carrying over 750,000 passengers each day, but also a major freight route, carrying over 350,000 carloads of freight per year. So that the Northeast Corridor is a vital transportation link for the region and a major economic engine. It supports over 100,000 jobs. All of this makes it so critically important that we continue to invest heavily in keeping our railroads safe. That is one of the reasons why I am alarmed at what is happening in Washington. As you know, the House majority, Republicans, are proposing to slash the funding for government programs going back to the 2022 level, which among other things includes devastating cuts on programs and investments that our residents depend on every day. For instance, funding that is vital for ensuring that transportation safety and for improving our country's infrastructure. They are demanding that the cuts, even after what we saw in East Palestine, Ohio, when a Norfolk Southern freight train carrying hazardous materials, including vinyl chloride, ethylene glycol, ethyl hexyl acylate, butyl acrylate, and isobutylene, derailed. The derailment caused a fire and a plume of black smoke. Fortunately, the fire was extinguished, but the cleanup of these hazardous materials is still ongoing. The train derailment in East Palestine had a significant impact to its residents. Nearly 5,000 people were evacuated. Businesses were forced to close. Many of the residents say they are still living in limbo, unsure of how to move on from the accident, worrying about what will happen to them and the town where they have roots, friendships, families, and their homes. So it's not the time to make cuts that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are proposing. Cuts that would significantly undermine rail safety, reducing the Federal Railroad Administration's That has got to be the Acela making its way back to Washington. I would normally, not on a Friday, but on a Monday would be on the train going back. In any case, the point is it's not the time to make cuts that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are proposing. This is it. Cuts that would reduce the Federal Railroad Administration's safety and operations account by $55 million, which would result in the lowest funding level for the Federal Railroad Administration and their core safety programs and personnel in nearly a decade. Now is the time where we need to invest in furthering and strengthening rail safety. We passed a legislation that would invest in transportation safety and our infrastructure a year ago. And what we're doing now stands in stark contrast to what the House, to Speaker McCarthy's plan, which is short-sighted, and it would cut a broad range of critical programs by at least 22%, cutting rail safety inspections at a time, as I said, when train derailments are wreaking havoc on community safety. Department of Transportation says that the House GOP's proposal, these are not my words, the House GOP proposed framework would lead to nearly 7,500 fewer rail safety inspections, over 30,000 fewer miles of track that is inspected every year. That is enough track to cross the United States nearly 10 times. Here in Connecticut, it would lead to 50 fewer rail safety inspection days and 80 fewer miles of track inspected next year alone. Connecticut has 207 miles of railroad and shipments containing some 1.5 million tons of freight originate on those tracks. At a time when the Connecticut Department of Transportation has so focused on using the investments from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to make long overdue upgrades to our transportation, including our railways, there could not be a more foolish time to implement these cuts. Our state, the state of Connecticut, would lose nearly $718 million in funding for transit and highway infrastructure projects. It would severely impact Amtrak, which we rely on here in Connecticut. Example, $580 million reduction below the level when I was chair of appropriations that I had responsibility for. It will decrease funding for key projects across the country already underway. The cuts delay or even put at risk major capital projects which have been planned. The cuts would lead to nearly $540 million in a reduction to Amtrak. That would then affect the railroad's ability to maintain, to improve its infrastructure, and continue delivering intercity travel options that more than 30 million passengers, including myself, rely on every single year. Northeast Corridor, reduced funding would lead to deteriorating ride quality, longer trip times due to delays. You know the governor has spoken from this very spot and talking about how we increase the speed so that we can move our trains faster. It would slow orders that could otherwise be mitigated by maintaining Amtrak's investment in the Northeast Corridor infrastructure. National Network would reduce funding and delay important capital maintenance that could force Amtrak to cut back service, particularly on long-distance routes that connect more than 300 communities across 39 states. It really is unacceptable. And I'm going to fight like hell, really, to make sure that it does not happen. Every year, I chaired the Appropriations Committee, and I chaired it in the last Congress, and now I serve as the ranking member on appropriations. We made decisions about how to fund government programs. We secured $3.4 billion for the FRA, an increase of nearly $79 million, which included $560 million for Consolidated Railroad Instruction and Safety Improvements Program, $2.45 billion for Amtrak, and which we rely on in Connecticut. Listen to the announcements. It is about Amtrak. And we included $1.26 billion in the Northeast Corridor. What we ought to be doing is what we did in 2023, we ought to build on for 2024, to build on that process, to make sure that that rail is safe and that we are increasing its capacity to make sure that passengers and freight get to where they need to go in the fastest way possible. Simply put, we cannot allow this to happen. We need to make sure that it doesn't happen, and we need to be calling on everyone to make sure that these cuts do not move forward. I thank folks for being here today. And first, let me turn things over to the CEO and President of the Rail Passengers Association, Jim Matthews. Jim, who came here today to be here for this event.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Jim Matthews. I'm the President and CEO of the Rail Passengers Association. We represent more than 40 million Americans who rely on trains for work, for travel, and to access essential services. And I would like to thank the Congresswoman for sounding the alarm on this issue and for helping to activate her colleagues on both sides of the aisle around the real risks that are posed by some of these cuts. You know, slashing Amtrak's budget really hurts those Americans who rely on rail and transit to get them where they need to go. And there's hundreds of millions of Americans who would choose trains if they had the access. With the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, Congress came together to provide a historic level of investment in our infrastructure. And we've already started to undo the damage of half a century of neglect and disinvestment in our systems, and we're starting to see the benefits. There are new trains and locomotives on order for corridor services in many states across the country, in addition to the Northeast Corridor. And Amtrak is now turning to fleet replacement for trains that serve long-distance travelers across the network. Investments in fleet are an example of how important the infrastructure bill is to strengthening the U.S. rail supply chain. You know, with demand for intercity train service growing, America needs more domestic products. And that's why it's so exciting to see that Siemens, the train manufacturer, for example, has recently announced they're building a second U.S.-based train manufacturing plant in North Carolina, revitalizing America's domestic manufacturing sector and providing hundreds of family wage jobs while also replacing our aging rail fleet with modern, safe equipment. Amtrak is advancing more than $1 billion worth of station improvements in over 200 communities around the country, and that will improve accessibility for all riders. Amtrak's already beginning to rebuild bridges and tunnels right here in the Northeast, including some that were originally built during the Civil War. Amtrak funding is critical to supporting construction of the new Gateway Hudson River Tunnel in New York, which will replace the 113-year-old connection, which today carries 450 trains and 200,000 passengers every single day. And finally, none of this is going to be possible without a strong American workforce. And so Amtrak is able to hire and train thousands of new employees thanks to the investments in the bipartisan infrastructure law. We cannot afford to waver now. Amtrak is an essential transportation link in the Northeast. We know that. Without the 2,200 daily trains and 260 million annual trips it carries, the lives of tens of millions of Americans would be severely disrupted. But Amtrak also plays a critical role for the 62 million Americans who live in rural America. A quarter of them are veterans. Another quarter are senior citizens over the age of 65. Almost 1/5 of Amtrak's passengers travel to or from a rural station with no access to air service. So whether you work on Wall Street or Main Street, you should be worried about these proposed cuts. It means more cars on the highways, where the average American wastes hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars every year stuck in traffic. It means more highway deaths, which we can't afford. More than 46,200 Americans died on U.S. roads and highways in 2022 alone. Highway travel is 17 times more dangerous than train travel. And for some smaller communities, it means foregoing trips to the doctor or to visit with family entirely. We've seen hundreds of small and mid-sized American cities become less served by regional airlines. Over 300 airports have seen services cut back 30%. So wherever you look across the economy, mobility is decreasing when it should be increasing. It's not a question of whether Amtrak trains make money. It's about who the Amtrak trains make the money for. Trains are an economic engine in the communities they serve. through jobs, retail, mobility, tourism, real estate development. This station right now is an example of that. Look at the hub of activity that is taking place here, and it's here because of the train. The profit from a train service does not go to Amtrak. It goes to the communities that are served, to the tune of billions of dollars. Taken as a whole, Amtrak's Northeast Corridor and national network together create somewhere between $7 billion and $8 billion in value for the U.S. economy. And that doesn't even count the $2 billion of direct spending Amtrak makes in states like Connecticut. If we cut Amtrak's budget with no regard to the communities who depend on it, we will be saving millions of dollars, but will be costing our economy billions of dollars. That means real pain for American families all across the nation. We must continue these investments in our physical infrastructure to ensure a bright future for this country. The bottom line is that cutting millions to save billions is bad public policy. And I want to congratulate the Congresswoman for her leadership in making sure that Americans know that this is what's afoot. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jim. You really laid out all of the pieces of this. And what's going on now with regard to rail travel and safety is something that I think the public is not really aware of what is happening. And that's one of the reasons for being here today, is to make people aware of really what the depth of these cuts would mean overall to, and what effect they would have on their lives. Just a second, where is Doug Housleyden here, who's executive director of the Parking Authority? Is he, all right, he's gone in that direction anyway. And he has jurisdiction over Union Station, so I'm grateful that they let us be here this morning to do this. But what I'd like to do now is to introduce New Haven's Director of Transportation, Sandeep Isola. Sandeep?
Thank you for being here. So I'll just make a general statement on this. I think there's a lot of things that the Congresswoman has covered already. But just to give you a sense, the U.S. transportation system overall plays a very critical role in our society and economy. And that's something that we all recognize. It provides accessibility and mobility for our people and goods. But additionally, we should be continuously making investments in it to ensure these vital systems have the resources to function, to make sure it's essential to the social and economic well-being of our communities. But it's also critical to our internal and our national security. Broad cuts to our transportation system will lead to a limited capacity, fewer and delayed repairs and inspections, jeopardizing not only our nation's economy, but also threaten our communities, health, environment, and quality of life. For example, as the Congresswoman earlier talked about, last year, there were 1,000 train derailments across the country, almost 3 incidents per day. The Norfolk Southern disaster in Ohio demonstrates what would happen if we do not strengthen regulations or make investments in ensuring the safety of our rail system. Our overall transportation system is so overwhelmed and chronically underfunded already. So significant reductions in funding to it would have potentially devastating impacts. In fact, in my opinion, we should be making increased investments in our transportation system to not only build a more sustainable, equitable transportation system that will create jobs, improve safety, tackle climate change, and increase quality of life, but also enhance the long-term resiliency of the system so it can thrive for future generations. I thank Congresswoman Representative Rosa DeLauro and all our congressional delegation for their leadership and support. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this important issue. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Sandeep. And I'm really happy to open it up to questions. Go ahead. No, let's just step back for a second. First of all, we're talking about two separate issues. One is the debt ceiling, which 78 times we have lifted in this country. Most recently, in the Trump administration, we lifted the debt ceiling 3 different times, and there was no difficulty with doing that. It is paying your bills. You get your credit card. Some companies say you have to pay it all at once. Some give you more leeway, but nevertheless, you are responsible for paying your bills. Federal government is responsible for paying its bills. It's as simple as that. So that there is no reason why, except for political motives, that the Speaker has conflated government spending along with the debt ceiling. Now, when you begin to take a look at the scope and the scale of those cuts, like we are talking about here in terms of rail safety, you begin to get some idea of the game of chicken that the Speaker is playing fast and loose with people's lives, with economic and commerce and the delivery of goods. So therefore, one has to disassociate those efforts. And so there are conversations that are occurring, and it is my view that the work of dealing with appropriations needs to be not Speaker McCarthy making a political decision about what he wants to do, but put it into the hands of the both Republican and Democratic appropriations committees so that they can hammer it out in the same way that they hammered out the government spending bill last December. That is what should happen. We'll wait to see what comes out of these talks before I will wait to see what happens, but you know what my view is. These are separate issues, and we will, see what comes out of the conversations. But understand what the Speaker is doing is holding our economy, holding government services hostage to a function which is a constitutional responsibility, which is to raise the debt and the debt ceiling. No. Let's start from this point. We have to have a budget. The budget does not need to be in conjunction with the debt ceiling, which is what they have done. And they say, if you don't make all of these cuts, we will not vote to lift the debt ceiling. That is their politics of what they want to do. That is what is keeping us on the brink of a problem. Now, yes, there needs to be negotiation on the budget, which is a separate item altogether. I have negotiated the budget. I did it last December with Democrats and Republicans in the House and in the Senate. We came to a conclusion. People did not get every single thing that they wanted, but we came to a conclusion and we passed a budget, and with appropriations bills, they have to be passed by both the House and the Senate. They have to be passed by Democrats and Republicans in order for the president to sign the bill. We did it in December. We did it a year ago in March. We can do it again. There is no need to conflate these two issues and put this nation at the brink of an economic default and a crisis. Thank you. Other questions? Any? Okay. Thank you. Thanks very, very much. Thank you.